And St. Paul wrote about that, Christ within, the hope of glory, Christ in you, the hope of glory. But St. Paul had a real sense of that as well. Yeah. God immanent, yeah. Christ immanent in our lives. Rebirth, rebirth, reincarnation is an idea that I think is more central to New Age thought than it is to Christian thought. Although there are a couple references to reincarnation in the Bible, absolutely. In the New Testament, there are pretty blatant references. One of them, where the disciples asked Jesus if John the Baptist was Elias returned, and he said, yes, he is. He didn't say, what a stupid question, or are you kidding me? No. He just very simply said, yes, he is. Many biblical scholars think that reincarnation was just a common understanding among people who were teachable and taught at that time, and that's why Jesus didn't have to teach it, because it was kind of accepted. Another example in the Bible would be when the disciples came upon a blind man, and they said to Jesus, who sinned, Master, that this man be born blind, he or his parents? Well, if he's born blind, how could his sin cause that? He certainly didn't sin in the womb, unless he lived a previous life in which to sin and cause himself to be born blind. So reincarnation or rebirth is implied there. Now, a lot of that was removed, was it not, from the Christian teachings?
That's what we understand. And early in the Christian church, you can imagine the infighting that happened as Christianity became sort of canonized in the Bible as we have it today. And certainly lots of people didn't hold it with the reverence which we currently do. And there's plenty of historical evidence that the original Christian fathers accepted reincarnation as a fact of life, and that there was political infighting in which references to reincarnation were essentially purged from the New Testament. But some were overlooked, as you rightly point out.
And you quote the Catholic Encyclopedia as one of the sources that talks about this.
Absolutely.
Now, when we talk about rebirth and reincarnation, we're not talking about people coming back as animals.
No.
That's the transmigration of souls, and that's a completely different topic, and I just want to make sure everyone understands that we're not talking about that.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the soul taking different bodies and different lives to continue the growth, picking up where it left off in the previous lifetime, right?
Yeah. And quite a different view there. Again, a view that we're more familiar with as being expressed in the Eastern religions, but a view that I think is becoming increasingly central to the New Age thought, and it's becoming increasingly central to everyone's thought, it seems to me. There are plenty of references to rebirth and reincarnation in the popular press now from people who would never identify themselves with the New Age. And so I think that this is an idea whose time has really arrived, and it's finally saturating into people. And it's an idea that makes tremendous sense. If one thinks about it, suddenly the world becomes a much more understandable and just place if we can have some sense of, well, why is it that I was born into the particular privileges that I was born into, and you were born into the particular privileges and challenges that you were born into, and we have a sense that, oh, maybe the things that are happening to me are actually happening to me for reasons that have to do with my own evolution toward realization.
And how could a God of love let a child be born and then die shortly thereafter, or let someone be born who is crippled? You know, how could a God of love allow this to happen in that universe? Well, it's not their only chance at it. They'll be back. You know, that kind of idea.
And if you see life
explains child prodigies, things
absolutely,
like that.
Absolutely.
It does make a lot of sense.
If you see life as a one-off thing, where you get this one life and that's it, and then it's over, all these things that you talk about, both on the positive end, prodigies, and on the negative end, children who are born with tremendous challenges and difficulties, it seems blatantly unfair. But if you see it as, oh no, this is just one life of many, 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 in which the soul comes time after time into incarnation to try to perfect the awareness which we have in incarnation, then one gets a sense, oh, it's just a short phase of life.
Let's go to the heart of it now. Let's talk about the nature of Christ as viewed by Christianity and as viewed by New Age thought and prophecy.
Yeah.
They're quite different.
Yeah. And let's talk particularly about the second coming. I mean, we all know that Christianity began with Jesus' life, and from the New Age perspective, especially those last 3 years of his life, were the crucial years of his life, when in a sense he was the Christ, and what we would call the Christ energy was expressing through him clearly and purely, and these fantastic teachings, which have been with us ever since, were expressed in a very short period of time, actually. Now, the second coming, of course, is prophesied in the Bible, and Christians have their views of the second coming on the basis of that. And it seems to me, as I've worked for years now with the notion of the second coming as a real thing, in fact, happening today, Christians are the one group that have the hardest time accepting these ideas because their ideas about the second coming are quite narrowly defined on a very literal interpretation of what's in the Bible. And to my mind, the best response to that is to remind them that the Jews missed Christ entirely because of the very same mistake. On the basis of their teachings, they had a very narrow, literal sense of a warrior coming out of the house of David,
right.
And they didn't recognize Christ because he seemed different from that. And I would say to Christians who are taking too literal interpretation of the Bible that they stand a chance of making the exact same mistake this time.
Most Christians expect Christ to come and it will be the end of the world.
Oh, yes.
And New Age thought is different.
New Age thought is very different. New Age thought, again, back to Alice Bailey, actually made the first pronouncements of this in 1945, 1949, that the world teacher, the one who is the Christ for all humanity, had made a momentous decision to return to the world in fully physical form sometime near the end of the century that just ended.
And it's my understanding that has happened.
Absolutely. Benjamin Creme followed on Alice Bailey, as I mentioned earlier, in 1975 began a work which was prophesied by Bailey of being one of a group of people whose purpose it was to try to alert humanity to the imminent reappearance of the Christ. And when I say the Christ, you have to realize I'm not talking about just the Christ for Christians. The imminent reappearance of the world teacher is probably a better way to understand it, but since we're talking about Christianity, the one who we believe is reappearing now is in fact the one who Christians, did they but know it, should be expecting.
But will be the teacher for all humanity this time.
Absolutely.
And he came like the biblical prophecy, a thief in the night? Yes. Like a thief in the night, stay awake, stay alert?
Yeah. And
because
today,
he came unannounced.
Oh, absolutely unannounced. And those who expected to see some great signs in the sky and hear the sounds of trumpets after we had all died and the rest, I think we'll find that they're wrong about that. Why would the Christ come at a time like that? His purpose isn't to sort of wave his hands over a desolated planet. His purpose is to help humanity move forward toward its next step in God realization, toward divinity, just as Jesus did 2,000 years ago. The Christ comes today to help us realize who we are and what we can be, and to make that happen in the world.
To be a teacher.
Absolutely. I should really emphasize this because it's so central to what I would call
we have 1 minute.
Essential New Age thought, which is absolutely at the core of New Age thought is the belief that there is a hierarchy of masters, we call them, fully realized souls who have gone through human evolution, and at the core of that group is a man called the world teacher, and that world teacher is emerging into the world today. And when he emerges, I think that all that we're talking about today will become very clear.
I want to reemphasize the similarities because there are so many.
Absolutely.
The idea of justice, the idea of love being at the core of Christian thought and New Age thought, the idea that Christ is at the heart of it all,
yes.
The idea that there is eternal hope, that life is eternal, we're not stuck with these bodies and that this is it. When it's over, they both, although held in slightly different ways, see it as going on and on, that we are spirits having a human experience, not humans having a spiritual experience.
Absolutely. And these two great streams of thought should be allies in the war to spiritualize life on earth.